We're heading into the future of AI, and it doesn't just support your work. It actually shows up in your teams. Running SOPs, prepping reports, managing outreach, follow-ups, and most companies, their workflows are stuck thinking AI is just a fancy autocomplete. I'm Justin L. Brown.
I'm Ryan Edwards.
And today we're talking about AI agents. What are they? Why are they coming fast? And how to prep your workflows so they're ready for the new kind of teammate.
Before we get into that, you said something which was really interesting in your intro.
Okay.
You said we're going into the future of AI. One of the craziest things that we're seeing is people are using AI to cement the past. They're using AI so they don't have to move into the future. They're using AI to cement their old SOPs instead of creating new, agile, rethinking their SOPs, rethinking their KPIs with AI in mind. So I think that's like one of the number one problems that we see actually is people are using this future technology of AI to avoid the future.
The visual of that is seared in my mind now where, people, we all, I guess, want to be comfortable with the way that we've always done things. So that makes perfect sense that people are using AI to kind of cement themselves into legacy workflows, something we've been talking about this entire time.
Yeah. So it all boils down to one question. What do you want? What do you want? Do you want success or do you want comfort? Because success is rarely comfortable.
That's real. Let's get into the first question. What is the clearest signal that we're entering into this agent era? What makes it different from where we were 6 months ago?
Well, the agent era is a really interesting topic because on the one hand, there is a large argument that we're not in the agent era. There's a large argument that we may never have agents or it'll be a very long time. But on the other hand, there's also a decent argument that we're in the agent era. To me, what is an agent? An agent is supposed to be a AI with a purpose. An AI that is designed and taught by you to achieve an end result and do some very specific tasks. That's a simple definition of an agent. Now, from my point of view, if I create a custom GPT, from my point of view, that's an agent. But from the technical aspect of AI, the technical aspect of an AI professional, they'll tell me all day long that's not an agent. That's just an instance. It's some instructions. It's instructions just put into the AI in a very efficient way. But from my point of view, that's an agent. And I think for 99% of the people out there who just want functionality, their goal isn't to be an AI professional. Their goal is to use AI to make them better at their profession. That is a good enough definition of agent.
Got it. So when we go into ChatGPT and we create our own agent and put our own instructions in there, add in some files that we want that GPT to call back to, that is good enough for most individuals to utilize as their version of an agent.
Yeah. That does more than gets the job done. And that's an extremely efficient and, more importantly, an extremely approachable way for most people to create their own agent.
Okay. And I feel like there are a few people that have done it. Some people don't even know that there's a button there that you can do that, and let alone what you put into the instructions. But for the ones who have done that, what is the real version of an AI agent?
The real version of an AI agent is taking an instance of AI, for example, Llama, or you can use an API call through ChatGPT. And an API call is just a special way to access ChatGPT without actually going to ChatGPT or OpenAI to use it. Create your own specified use of it. Usually combine it with a few other sources using this thing called an MCP. And then you want to also combine that an MCP server and I'm blanking on what MCP stands for right now, but it basically is a model that allows you to do multiple calls at once. Multiple call protocol. There we go. That allows you to do multiple calls at once. You combine that with, for example, an observational layer. Observational layer is just a layer that breaks open the black box and allows you to understand and see what's going on so you can get insights into it, correct it, find what's wrong. And usually you also pull in various other sources. A real example of that is for one of our clients that we do a complex report for every month, we actually created an agent that pulls in all kinds of marketing data from 3 different sources. It pulls in live census data from the government, and it does an automated web scrape on 5 different scrapes every day on its own. And then various days of the week, it performs various tasks that build upon each other. That's an agent that works on its own. And it does great. It doesn't provide us with the end-all answer, but it provides us with an incredibly good set of insights, very regulated, exact same thing, exact same way every single time.
You actually touched on it a little bit, but I do want to go a little bit deeper. What type of conditions should exist before a team should say, yeah, let's have an agent run this process for us? What are those parameters that go from I want to put in a prompt into Claude versus I want to actually build out like my GPT where it has instructions? That's good. We talked about a little earlier on building a GPT for specific instructions. And then versus what you just talked about, what are some parameters that teams should look at that says, yeah, we definitely need an agent for this position?
Here's the litmus test that I use for if you actually need an agent, particularly in a team or a larger company, or this even works for a solopreneur. Are you at the point when if AI didn't exist that you'd be hiring an employee or hiring a outside consultancy or an agent or somebody to do the job? If you're at that point, yeah, you're a good time to explore an agent. If you're at the point where you're just trying to save some time, where you're just trying to get more insights, you're trying to solve a specific problem, but it's not a problem that requires a new team member, then you probably don't need an agent. That is the good litmus test for it.
Got it. Yeah. I like that analogy where if you wouldn't hire somebody, even if it is entry level hire or a task that you would give to somebody that you would hire that is a very robust task that they would have to repeat over and over again, then an agent isn't really necessary.
Yeah. And then there's a second layer on top of that. Just because you would hire a new person for that, then is the agent the right solution for it? Mm-hmm. Because keep in mind, here's the problem with an agent. The problem with an agent is the agent really does what it's supposed to do and doesn't work outside of those parameters. And if you do force it to work outside of those parameters, the output of an agent degrades rapidly. If you hire a new person, you hire a new person for this role, but you understand, this person's capacity for learning is much greater than an agent, and they might expand into new roles very quickly. Whereas the difference is an agent doesn't have the capacity really to expand out of creativity into new roles, but their capacity to input and output knowledge is greater than any person.
Got it. So as we've been talking about throughout these episodes, you understand your SOP by auditing your SOP. Then through auditing your SOP, you start to understand where automations could actually be plugged in. And some of those automations might be taking a file and then dropping it into a GPT to give you an outcome that's very specific to that outcome. That doesn't necessarily need an agent. It could just be your custom GPT. What you just explained is that there's that space between having your custom GPT and then having an actual human in the loop, or just a person doing the process that an agent would live. And right now, that space is a little volatile because it's very structured. It has concrete walls, and anything that you need outside of that won't necessarily be helpful by just having um, that agent do that. It could hallucinate, it can go rogue, it could do a lot of things. But when you really know that this is a task that's a complicated task that you need to be executed on a daily, weekly, monthly basis, that's when you want to apply an agent. Am I assuming that's right?
100%. And the one thing that people are confused about with agents is they think it's create and forget. You create the agent and it keeps on going and going and going. And it will keep on going and going and going, but it won't keep on going the same way. It will, what if once any parameters change within the agent, you have to update that agent. For example, if you're inputting data and where you're coming from, the source you're inputting it from into it changes, you have to change your agent. If you're doing marketing and there's a big cultural shift, you have to update the agent to understand what that shift is, because the agent is only going to try to work at that one point of time. Great example is I was talking to a guy yesterday who created an agent, very proud of, that was based on ChatGPT, and his goal was to decrease the number of hallucinations as he was doing data analysis on market landscapes for paid search and paid AdWords buys. But the problem was that although he created MCP and observation layers and everything that was perfect, he used OpenAI for the starting point and the end point. So his goal was to decrease hallucinations, but at the beginning, at the end point, he still used OpenAI. And he was still asking it broad questions. So it's not just enough to make an agent. You have to define the starting point and the end points. And you have to think, how is this going to be better than a prompt? How is this going to be better than a GPT?
I remember one of our first conversations when you and I became friends, you gave me a list of ways to use AI before agents, before all of these things was happening. And one of the things you called out was when you start in, say, ChatGPT and you get an answer, have ChatGPT write a prompt and then send it over to Claude, and then work in Claude, and then have Claude write a prompt from where you started there, and then send it over to Llama, and then from there, take it back to ChatGPT so that way you can minimize the amount of hallucinations. So you were talking about this person that started and ended with the same platform. You're going to basically get the same amount of hallucinations that you would have gotten if you'd have just stayed in that platform.
Right.
So that actually, and it really brings me to, you weren't necessarily the teammate, but in that instance, you were the teammate, brings me to my next question, which is what happens when you try to drop in an agent into a team that has, that's still operating on tribal knowledge. So you have a team of 5 that all will need to contribute to an agent, but say one teammate or two teammates build this agent. How does that team that has a variety of different knowledge base make sure that the agent is operating properly?
You have to understand at the team level, have a collective purpose that lifts the team for the agent. In that example, the perfect use of an agent would be as a single source of knowledge to collect the team's knowledge, to work in that capacity so everybody inputs their learnings into the agent, and the agent can see trends across several people that couldn't be pulled out. That'd be an incredibly great use of an agent in the example that you gave. And a horrible use of an agent would be if you have a team of 5 people and you create an agent that repeats the task only in the way that 2 people do it, and 3 other people do that same task in a different way. That would be destructive to the team,
Yeah.
because now you're either forcing people to work a new way, or you have two people working really efficiently in a way that can't be repeated by the rest of the team. So in that instance, for a team, the agent needs to have a purpose that elevates the team, not the individual.
Yeah. Which brings us to our next piece. It's a question, but it's a little bit of a long one, so I'm going to read this. It's basically the teammate test. So you use this test to make sure that the full functioning team is in alignment with what this agent coming on board. The questions is, would you trust the agent if it was a person on your team? Would you onboard them, give them context, hold them accountable? And if the answer is no, then the system isn't ready for an agent. The question for you is, what do you think makes that process pass that test?
Here's our approach and how we approach that situation. Maybe that's the easiest way for me to answer it. The way that we look at it is the agent there to be a team member, or is the agent there to support the team? And if the agent is there to support the team, then how can the agent be created in a way that's broad enough to support the team? If the agent is there to be a team member, then how does the agent interact with the people in the team that feed into it and the output of it? And this is where we get back into the importance of what we talked about in previous episodes of the audit, because it's important to understand what each team member does, what each team member can do, and what each person has to do compared to what can be taken off that person. So that's our approach. That's why we've talked about audit so much, because our approach is to understand how the team functions and then how that agent could be the best team member.
Really, it comes down to what we've been talking about this entire time, which is, do you know your SOP? Do you understand it in a way that those automations could actually be helpful? And is it actually a smart logic flow? All those need to be in place before you even start thinking about an agent. So now let's go to the flip side. What happens when you plug in an agent when all of those things are actually right? And what are the upsides when it's done right?
I mean, the upsize when it's done right is, first of all, here's one of the things that teams need most of. And again, this is what we look at when we go to a team. What is the core need the team has? And what we find a lot of times is the core need a team has isn't really efficiency. It is really consistency. It is really trust and confidence. And done right, an agent creates that trust and confidence because its output is reliable. Its output is consistent. And that's what an agent does. And it allows the people on the team then to work in messy ways, which people are way better at than AI, creatively, strategically, thinking of things, because they know at the base they have the trust and that consistency. And that's what an agent brings when done right.
Yeah. I wonder I remember a couple episodes ago, you talked about nested boxes.
Mm-hmm.
Where do you think agents fit into that analogy that you use when you were talking about a nested box where you can be messy? When you use the word messy, it triggered that thought of, oh, this is the box that an individual is working in, and they can be as messy as they want. They have all the variables that they can utilize. And then that bigger box would likely be the team, where now you have all the other boxes from individuals being able to fit into that box. Where does an agent done properly fit into that analogy?
In that analogy, the agent is putting things into the box. So you have the box, you have your little box right there. You have like 3 or 4 of them. Mm-hmm. And then you have all the stuff in it that the people get to play around with and get messy with and get creative with. Mm-hmm. What the agent is doing is, and what an agent does is it goes around the room. The analogy was my daughter was moving and packing up her room. Mm-hmm. Goes around the room and says, oh, this goes into the box kitchen stuff. This goes into the box bedroom. This goes into the box personal stuff I want my parents to never see. Mm-hmm. And this goes into all those boxes. So
Yeah.
the agent goes around picking up things and putting them into the boxes. And then the team, the people get to say, oh, wait, actually, that doesn't belong in that box. Or, hey, we can take it out of the box and arrange it this way on the shelf. They get to then start working in that aspect.
Got it. The team is able to make some decisions as the agent helps do the hard work of deciding what goes in the kitchen, what goes in the bedroom, what goes in the bathroom, whatever those things are that the teammate doesn't necessarily have to be there for. The agent can help out with that. And then the teammate comes in, verifies the decision is right, and then is able to make another decision on top of that.
Yeah, think about it this way. Who likes packing?
Nobody.
Who likes unpacking?
I actually am okay with that.
Most people actually like unpacking.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, everyone hates packing.
Yeah.
Let the agent do your packing.
Yes, that was a great one.
Just to throw in one of my songs.
Okay.
You ever watched a TV show from the 70s, WKRP?
No.
It's an old 70s TV show. The theme song goes, I get tired and tired of packing and unpacking, town to town, up and down the dial. Agents would have helped him with that packing. He would have been so tired.
This is true. It's true. Also, maybe an agent could have helped me understand what TV show you're talking about.
WKRP. It was a TV show about a bunch of radio DJs.
Oh, okay.
It had Venus Flytrap. It had Johnny Fever.
No, I don't know any of these. I appreciate how young you make me feel. This is a great segue into our ideology drop.
Drop it like it's hot.
Drop it like it's hot. What we would like to do is we actually built a agent-ready workflow checklist. And this is not a to-do list. It's actually a diagnostics tool. And it's going to help the process of making sure that when you onboard an agent, you know that this agent is first qualified to do the job and finally is going to be useful for you and your teammates. So the list goes as follows. The first piece is you want to make sure that it's a comprehensive process mapping. The next piece is you go into a seamless integration points, and then you go into transparency and accountability. And after that, your checkpoints and override mechanisms. And finally, you go into a continuous improvement feedback loop. So starting with the first one, we would like to make sure that it's a comprehensive process mapping, which is basically getting everything down on paper.
Right. And I'm going to back it out just a touch before I talk about that. All of those that you mentioned are great. And what all of those really are is they're an onboarding checklist. They're an onboarding checklist for a person or for an agent. It works for both. And that's really how you need to approach it. We did a job for another agency. And there was an agent involved. We brought an agent in. And what we actually called it the agent onboarding. And we brought each team member in to work with that agent and onboard them to it. But every item that you mentioned in that checklist is part of onboarding a person or onboarding an agent. Treat it the same way. Treat it exactly the same way.
Just like that, you definitely don't want anything to be vague, scattered. Like you really want to make sure you treat it as something that is net new for everybody, especially because the agent is going to take on whatever information you're putting in. So if there's pieces that are missing, that gap is going to show up, and it's not going to show up at the best time. So you want to be very prescriptive.
100%. What was the first item on the list?
Comprehensive process mapping.
Exactly what you just said.
Yes, sir. So the next one on the list is the seamless integration point. And this is that point where you start to invite the team members in to use the agents.
Right. And it's as simple as this. You need to know how the agent will fit into the team. You need to know how the agent will be a team member. It's as simple as that. You need to understand where the inputs are coming in from and who's going to use the outputs, and are those useful to people?
Absolutely. What is that trigger point that the team member knows this is when you deploy this agent? And this goes into transparency and accountability.
And this is probably the most important one, because here's the problem that people have with agents and AI in general. They just want it to do its thing, and they just want to take what's outputted and say done. But really, you need to hold your agent accountable, just like you would hold anybody accountable for the right answer. In order to hold anybody or anything accountable, you have to have visibility. You have to understand how it's happening. You need to understand why it's happening. So you can say, okay, I understand now why the output is happening, but I have visibility into your process. If we change this one element, the output might be right, but it could be 10 times better just because we have that visibility.
And it takes a little work to be able to understand that you do want to look under the hood. And like you said, everything is working fine, but you want to make sure that you can trace back every step and look at each specific step in that process to understand, you know what, this not only is this one right, but the next version is going to be right.
Yeah. We had one project where the agent was working fine. The whole process was working fine. But when we created the visibility into what was happening, we created some little micro steps in the agent so we could get more visibility into it. What that pulled out was it didn't change the output, but that visibility gave us and everybody insights into the why that answer was happening. And those insights gave other insights. And that didn't change the output of the agent, but it changed the value of the agent because now that agent turned into an insight engine.
Mm-hmm.
All because we changed a few little things to create much more visibility in the process.
It reminds me of when I was in high school. I used to program my TI-83 with all the formulas, and it was giving me all the right answers, and it was super easy. And then I would actually have to take that answer and still work backwards and make sure that the long form, the step-by-step process was shown, or else I wasn't going to get the grade that I needed. And I believe that this is about the same version of that, where yes, you can, like your team was getting the right answers, but then the insights into those answers are just as valuable, if not even more valuable. So that brings us to our next point, which is checkpoints and override mechanisms.
Yes, you need checkpoints and you need override mechanisms. Yes, 100%. You need those.
Yes and yes.
I mean, I think that was answered in the previous ones, how important that is and how you need to plan those, because as with anything, you just don't want it to go and go and go. Things change. Your outcomes and your goals change. The culture and the landscape of which you work in changes. The inputs that go into your work changes. And when those inputs happen, people can adapt to those really quickly. A conversation, people intuitively adapt to those. Guess what? AI and agents, they don't intuitively adapt to those. They'll still be working under the roles and the parameters you gave them previously, although things have changed. That's why you need to have these points where you check in on it and you say, has something changed? Is it affecting it? And how can we correct it? And either to get the same output, or how can we use this to get a better outcome from the agent? Often you can get a better outcome by doing that.
Yeah, like you were saying in the previous example where the agent was actually working properly, but then you put these micro points in to get insights. Those insights, even though they came out great and everything looked fine, if there were insights where it could have been better, that's where you find those points. Is you have that safety valve set into the agent to make sure that, you know, at this point, if something's messing up, it's not going to mess up the delivery of whatever you need to be doing or delivering. So that makes a lot of sense. And it goes to our last point, which is continuous improvement and feedback loop.
I mean, that's what we've been talking about, continuous improvement. And feedback loop is interesting because, again, if you almost look at it like it's a team member, a person, and you schedule regular times to give it feedback, to look at it and say, here's what is going on right, here's what's going on wrong, here's what can be improved, and here's how we can expand the scope of reference. Treat it like that. Treat it like schedule regular feedback times once a month to give it a performance review.
Because it is a teammate.
It is.
And by putting it that way, it makes it so that way it allows the accountability that the rest of the team has to have for that agent less daunting, because you know that you've done your micro check-ins, you've done your holistic check-in, and just like you would do for anyone that was onboarded, you want to make sure that they're comfortable, you're comfortable with the outcome that they're giving you. And from there, you can move faster and smarter. So what I want to do is actually give our audience a small, minute task.
Professor J is giving you all homework.
Yes. So we started this podcast talking about how some people look at their instructional agents, like on when you build a custom GPT, as an agent that's just good enough for them to actually operate from. They don't necessarily need to make an entire workflow. But even in that process, there's still check-ins and there's still auditing that they can do. So what I would like our audience to do is go back and look into those outcomes and see how those outcomes have been affected. Are they getting a little stagnant, or are they actually are they still just as efficient as they were when you first implemented it? And if you do have agents, what I would like to do is look at that agent. Did you actually write in every single step? Did you account for every single step like we talked about? Did you put in micro check-ins so that way when it's running through that entire process, your steps that you're taking are with confidence? And if so, then congratulations. And if not, then I hope this is that call to action where you know to look in and try to make those tweaks yourself. And if you can't make those tweaks yourself, we have Ryan here from Camino5 that can help not only on the individual level, but on an enterprise level. So Ryan, how would you and your team help out with making sure that teams are implementing agents properly?
We have custom agents we've built for ourselves and for clients. One of the things that we do is we go in and we audit those agents once a month to make sure they're working properly and they're giving the best outcome. We also have conversations with the team members. We just had a conversation last week with a person from one of our clients and teams where we went over, how to do certain tasks. Now, what we're going to do once we had that conversation and outlined the tasks and create the process of which we could do it by hand, we're going to look at that and look at what of that we can create an agent for. Then we're going to show it back to the team members, and we're going to say, here's how. Is this output what you need? Is this working for you? And it's that iterative process that will integrate with them. But if you notice, what I said in there is we had the conversation with them. We're going to do it once by hand to make sure that we understand each steps and understand what can be automated. And then once we're done, we're going to show the output to the person, and we're going to go over it with them, and we're going to see if this is what they need. And by doing that process, we get not just what works for today, but we get what works for tomorrow, and we get for them actually what kind of exceeds their expectations, because we're just not taking their requests. We're just not taking a work order. We're looking at the problem and we're solving the problem with the agent.
I love that. Next week, we're going to be talking about the culture factor, how to lead teams through AI changes without losing trust, because it's not about the system, it's about humans learning to work differently. Thank you for watching Process of Elimination.